The call came at 3:47 a.m. I remember staring at my phone screen, wondering who would call at such an hour. The hospital's number flashed, sending a chill down my spine before I even answered. "My name is Avery, and that call changed everything." "Miss Callahan? This is Mercy General Hospital. We need you to come in immediately. Your parents have been in an accident." The drive to the hospital exists in my memory as fragments, red lights bleeding into darkness, windshield wipers fighting against unexpected rain. My hands shaking on the steering wheel. I kept telling myself they were fine, probably just some broken bones or a concussion. Parents don't just die on random Tuesday nights. Except sometimes they do. The impact was instantaneous, the doctor explained, his voice gentle but clinical. They wouldn't have suffered. I stood there in the fluorescent-lit hallway, still wearing my pajama pants and my father's old college sweatshirt, trying to process words that refused to make sense. A drunk driver had crossed the median. My parents' car had flipped 3 times. There was nothing anyone could have done. "Would you like to see them?" the doctor asked. I shook my head. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing them like that. I wanted to remember them as they were at Sunday dinner just 2 days ago, Mom laughing at Dad's terrible puns, Dad pretending to be offended when I sided with Mom about his new mustache looking ridiculous. A nurse handed me a plastic bag containing their personal effects. Mom's purse, Dad's wallet, their phones, and wedding rings. Such small things to represent entire lives. "There's someone who'd like to speak with you," the nurse said, gesturing toward a man in an expensive-looking suit who'd been hovering nearby. He witnessed the accident and stayed to give a statement to the police. The man approached, his expression grave but kind. "I'm Marcus Bennett," he said, extending his hand. "I'm so sorry for your loss." I tried to help, but he trailed off, and I noticed his suit was stained with what looked like blood. I should have thanked him for trying to help, for staying, for caring enough to want to speak with me. Instead, I threw up in a nearby trash can. Marcus didn't flinch. He just produced a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to me when I straightened up. "Let me call someone for you," he said. "Family? Friends?" I wiped my mouth, shame mixing with grief. There's no one to call. My parents were it. The words hit me like a physical blow. They were it, I repeated, my voice breaking. Lucy, my best friend, would kill me for not calling her, but I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else's grief right now. I needed to hold myself together, and seeing Lucy break down would shatter what little control I had left. "Then let me at least drive you home," Marcus offered. "You shouldn't be alone right now, and you're in no condition to drive." I wanted to refuse, to maintain some semblance of independence in a moment when everything felt like it was slipping away. But the thought of getting back in my car, of driving through the same streets where my parents had just... I couldn't do it. "Okay," I whispered, clutching the bag of their belongings to my chest. As we walked toward the hospital exit, I caught my reflection in a window, pale, hollow-eyed, lost. Behind me, Marcus's reflection watched me with an intensity one was too numb to question. I didn't know then that this night would set in motion events that would test every belief I had about love, family, and justice. I didn't know that Marcus Bennett would become both my salvation and my nightmare. I just knew that in that moment, I was 28 years old and suddenly, catastrophically alone. Or at least, that's what I thought. The first week after my parents' death passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I sat at their kitchen table, surrounded by manila folders and sympathy casseroles, trying to make sense of insurance forms and funeral arrangements. That's when Marcus showed up again, carrying coffee and a leather briefcase. "I hope you don't mind," he said, setting a cup in front of me. "I remembered you take it with vanilla from the hospital cafeteria." I hadn't remembered telling him that. But grief does strange things to memory. "I'm a financial advisor," he explained, pulling out a chair. "I thought you might need help sorting through all this." Before I could respond, Lucy burst through the front door. She'd been checking on me daily, bringing food I couldn't eat and concern I couldn't handle. "Avery, why aren't you answering your..." She stopped short, eyeing Marcus. "Who's this?" I made introductions, watching Lucy's face shift from surprise to suspicion. Marcus stood, extending his hand with a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I was just offering to help Avery with the estate paperwork, he said. It can be overwhelming, especially with life insurance claims. Lucy's eyebrows shot up. And you just happened to stop by? Actually, I witnessed the accident, Marcus replied smoothly. I've been concerned about Avery's well-being. The tension in the room thickened. Lucy crossed her arms, positioning herself between Marcus and me like a shield. That's very thoughtful, she said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. But Avery has people to help her. Right, Avy? I should have agreed with Lucy. Should have noticed how Marcus's jaw tightened at her words, how his fingers drummed once, sharply, against his briefcase. Instead, I heard myself say, actually, Lucy, I could use some professional help with this. Lucy's face fell. Avery, it's just paperwork, I said quickly. And Marcus knows what he's doing. Of course he does, Lucy muttered, then louder. Fine. But I'm staying. Marcus smiled again, all charm. The more the merrier. For the next few hours, Marcus guided me through the maze of documents with practiced ease. He knew exactly which forms needed attention first, which companies to call, what questions to ask. Lucy watched from the couch, her presence both comforting and somehow irritating. Your parents had excellent life insurance, Marcus noted, reviewing a policy. But there might be some issues with the payout timing. I could expedite that through my firm. That would be... I swallowed hard, remembering Mom's insistence on maintaining those policies. That would be helpful. Avery, Lucy interrupted. Can we talk? Privately? In the kitchen, Lucy gripped my arms. Something's off about him. Why is he really here? He's helping, Lucy. He's inserting himself into your life when you're vulnerable. Don't you think it's convenient that he just happens to be a financial advisor? I pulled away. Not everything is a conspiracy. Sometimes people are just kind. And sometimes they're not, Lucy shot back. Have you even Googled him? Checked if he really works where he says he does? I hadn't, and Lucy's question made me feel foolish. But before I could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway. Everything okay? He asked, his concern seeming genuine. I found something interesting in your father's investment portfolio. You might want to take a look. Lucy threw up her hands. I need to get to work. Call me later, okay? After she left, Marcus sat closer than before, his shoulder occasionally brushing mine as he explained various financial terms. The house felt different with just us there, quieter, more intimate. You know, he said softly, I lost my parents young too. Car accident, actually. That's why I stayed that night at the hospital. I couldn't bear the thought of anyone going through that alone. Something in his voice made me look up. Our eyes met, and for a moment I saw past his polished exterior to something raw and familiar, grief recognizing grief. Thank you, I whispered, meaning it. Later, alone in bed, I checked my phone to find missed calls from Lucy and a text from Marcus. Let me know if you need anything. Anytime. I should have heard the possessiveness in those words. Should have noticed how quickly he was becoming necessary. Instead, I saved his number and fell asleep clutching my phone, feeling less alone than I had in days. 3 months after my parents' death, Marcus proposed. We were in his penthouse apartment, the city lights twinkling below like fallen stars. It should have felt magical. Instead, I felt dizzy, unmoored. It's too soon, I said, staring at the diamond ring that probably cost more than my parents' house. Is it? Marcus moved behind me, his hands on my shoulders. You're drowning in that empty house, Avery. Let me take care of you. I closed my eyes, remembering Mom's voice. Never let a man rush you into anything, sweetheart. But Mom was gone. And Marcus had been right about everything so far. The insurance money had come through faster with his help. The estate was settled. He'd even found a buyer for my parents' house who'd let me take my time moving out. I need to think, I said. His fingers tightened slightly on my shoulders. Of course. Take all the time you need. I called Lucy the next morning. She was already waiting at our usual coffee shop when I arrived. He what? Lucy nearly knocked over her latte. After 3 months? I know it seems fast, but... Fast? It's insane. Lucy leaned forward. What do you even know about him? He's successful, kind, stable. Those are resume points, not reasons to marry someone. Lucy pulled out her phone. Look at this. I did some digging. His first wife left him after 8 months. No explanation, just disappeared to another state. Changed her name. My stomach churned. People have complicated pasts. People have patterns. Lucy's voice softened. You're grieving, AV. You're vulnerable. And he knows it. I left the coffee shop angry, at Lucy for doubting Marcus, at myself for letting her words plant seeds of doubt. When I got home, Marcus was waiting on my porch. I thought you had meetings today, I said, fumbling with my keys. Cancelled them. You're more important. He followed me inside. Have you thought about my proposal? I turned to face him, ready to say I needed more time. But something in his expression made me pause. For just a moment, his carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. Yes, I heard myself say. Yes, I'll marry you. His smile was brilliant, triumphant. I'll take care of everything. We'll have the wedding next month, before winter sets in. Next month? My head spun. That's 2. Perfect timing, he interrupted smoothly. And you should move in right away. No sense paying to heat this big house alone. Within days, my life became a whirlwind of wedding plans and moving boxes. Marcus handled everything: the venue, the caterers, even my dress. You have enough to worry about, he'd say, kissing my forehead whenever I tried to object. The night before the wedding, Lucy showed up at Marcus's penthouse where I was already half moved in. Don't do this, she pleaded. Something's wrong. I can feel it. You don't know him like I do, I said, but my voice wavered. Neither do you. Lucy grabbed my hands. Remember when we were kids, and you always knew when someone was lying? What does your gut tell you about Marcus? Before I could answer, the front door opened. Marcus stood there, his expression pleasant, but his eyes cold. Lucy, he said. It's late. Avery needs her rest before tomorrow. I was just leaving. Lucy hugged me fiercely, whispering, call me if you need anything. Anytime. After she left, Marcus pulled me close. I know she means well, but Lucy needs to understand that things are different now. We're going to be a family. Family. The word echoed in my chest, filling the hollow space my parents' death had left. But as Marcus led me to bed, I caught our reflection in the window. He looked solid, certain. I looked like a ghost, fading at the edges. That night, I dreamed of my mother. She was trying to tell me something important, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of screeching tires and breaking glass. I woke up gasping, reaching for my phone to call Lucy. Marcus stirred beside me. Everything okay, sweetheart? I put the phone down. Just wedding jitters. He pulled me closer, his arm heavy across my waist. Don't worry. After tomorrow, everything will be perfect. I lay awake until dawn, wondering why perfect suddenly sounded so much like prison. The pregnancy test showed positive 2 months after the wedding. I stared at it in our marble bathroom, my hands shaking. This should have been a moment of pure joy, but my first instinct was to hide it from Marcus. I didn't understand why until that evening, watching him review our monthly expenses on his laptop. You spent $400 at that boutique? He didn't look up. We talked about discretionary spending, Avery. It was for work clothes, I said, touching my still flat stomach. My others don't fit right anymore. Now he looked up, his eyes sharp. Are you? I nodded, forcing a smile. His reaction was everything it should have been: joy, excitement, immediate calls to his family. But something felt off, like watching a perfect performance where you can see the strings. The next morning, I found my credit cards cut up on the kitchen counter. It's for the best, Marcus explained, sliding a new card across the granite. Joint account only. We need to be more careful now that we're having a baby. I picked up the new card. My name was missing from it, just Marcus Bennett in raised letters. I can't access my personal account anymore? Why would you need to? His tone was gentle, reasonable. I make more than enough for both of us. 3 of us now. The pregnancy progressed, and with it, Marcus's control tightened like a slowly turning screw. He hired a recommended doctor without consulting me. Installed security cameras in every room of our home. Started tracking my phone's location in case of emergency. I tried calling Lucy, but my calls kept going to voicemail. Finally, I got a text. Number no longer in service. When I asked Marcus about it, he shrugged. She probably changed carriers. You know how Lucy is, always changing her mind about things. Ethan was born on a stormy Tuesday. Marcus wasn't there. He had an unmissable meeting in Chicago. The nurse asked if I wanted to call someone else, and I realized I had no one left to call. Looking at my son's tiny face, something broke and reformed inside me. This perfect, innocent being depended on me completely, just like I now depended on Marcus. The thought hit me like ice water. When Marcus returned 3 days later, he had papers for me to sign. Just some adjustments to our life insurance and investments, he said, bouncing Ethan with practiced efficiency, making sure everything's properly protected. I scanned the documents, my postpartum fog lifting enough to catch phrases like full financial control and medical proxy. I should have my lawyer look at these, I said. Marcus's bounce hitched for just a second. Don't you trust me, sweetheart? After everything I've done for us. Ethan started crying, a sharp, desperate sound. Marcus handed him back to me with barely concealed irritation. He's always crying, he said later that night, after I'd spent hours trying to soothe our colicky son. Maybe we should hire a night nurse. Give you a break. I don't want a break, I said, holding Ethan closer. I want to be with my son. Our son, Marcus corrected, his smile not reaching his eyes. And I want what's best for both of you. You're clearly overwhelmed. I waited until he fell asleep before slipping into his home office. The papers were still there, along with others, bank statements showing massive transfers, documents about my parents' estate I'd never seen, and a folder labeled Jennifer Bennett, his first wife. Inside was a restraining order, police reports, hospital records. My hands trembled as I took photos with my phone, knowing I had minutes at most before Marcus's security system alerted him to movement in the office. Back in bed, Ethan sleeping against my chest, I felt Marcus stir beside me. Everything okay? He murmured. Perfect, I lied, my heart pounding. Just feeding the baby. He pulled me closer, his arm heavy across both me and Ethan. Possessive. Constraining. I lay awake until dawn, planning my escape, knowing I had to be smarter than Jennifer. Had to protect Ethan at all costs. But first, I needed to find Lucy. The breaking point came on Ethan's first birthday. Marcus had insisted on a lavish party, caterers, photographers, 50 guests I barely knew. I stood in our kitchen, watching him direct the staff like a general commanding troops, while Ethan cried in his high chair. He needs his nap, Marcus, I said, reaching for our son. He needs to learn to socialize properly. Marcus intercepted my movement, his fingers wrapping around my wrist. The Hendersons brought their board chairman. Appearances matter. I pulled away, the motion causing a stack of invitations to scatter across the floor. As I bent to pick them up, a familiar name caught my eye, Thompson. Lucy's parents were invited. Why are Tom and Sarah Thompson on the guest list? My voice shook. You said Lucy moved away. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Did I? Must have been a misunderstanding. Like the misunderstanding about Jennifer, the words slipped out before I could stop them. The kitchen staff suddenly found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. What did you say? Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. I found the restraining order, I said, my heart hammering. The police reports. What did you do to her, Marcus? He laughed, a sound that made Ethan whimper. You've been snooping in my office? That's disappointing, Avery. Very disappointing. Where's Lucy? What did you tell her to make her stay away? You should focus on our guests, he said, reaching for Ethan. I'll take him upstairs. I stepped between them. Don't touch him. He's my son. Is he? Because the paperwork I found shows you changed his birth certificate. Removed my name as mother. Marcus's mask slipped completely. You really shouldn't have gone through those files. Or what? You'll make me disappear like Jennifer. The slap came fast, but I was expecting it. What I wasn't expecting was the phone that clattered from his jacket pocket, my old phone, the one he'd said was accidentally destroyed months ago. We both stared at it. Quite a collection of texts from Lucy on there, I said, my cheek burning. Warnings about you. Offers to help me leave. Funny how I never got them. Marcus moved with frightening speed, but I was faster. I grabbed Ethan and backed toward the door. Think carefully about what you're doing, he said. You have no money, no family, nowhere to go. I made sure of that. You made one mistake, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. You let me find those documents about Jennifer. About what you really did with my parents' estate. His face went white. You don't understand. I understand enough. I held Ethan tighter. And so will the police when they see what I sent to my lawyer last week. You're bluffing. You don't have a lawyer. Jennifer's lawyer, I corrected. She was very interested in the pattern. The doorbell rang, the first guests arriving. Marcus's carefully constructed facade snapped back into place. We'll discuss this later, he said, straightening his tie. Don't make a scene. No, I said, we won't. I walked out the front door, past the arriving guests, ignoring their startled looks and Marcus's smooth excuses about my emotional state. I kept walking until I reached the park 3 blocks away, where a familiar figure sat on a bench. Took you long enough, Lucy said, standing up. I've been waiting here every day for weeks, hoping you'd figure it out. You never left. Of course not. She hugged me carefully, mindful of Ethan. But he had to think I did. Had to think you were completely isolated. We need to go, I said, looking back toward the house. He'll come after us. Let him try. Lucy led me to her car. Your grandmother Eleanor is waiting. Turns out she's been looking for you since your parents died. Marcus intercepted those calls too. As we drove away, I saw Marcus running down the street in his expensive suit, his mask completely gone. In the rearview mirror, he looked smaller, less powerful. He'll never stop, I said. No, Lucy agreed. But neither will we. Ethan fell asleep in my arms, peaceful for the first time in months. I held him close, knowing the fight ahead would be brutal, but feeling stronger than I had since that first hospital call. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you're really made of. Eleanor's Victorian mansion loomed against the stormy sky like something from a Gothic novel. Lucy pulled into the gravel driveway, and I felt a strange mix of fear and hope. This was my father's childhood home, the place he'd refused to discuss. She's been waiting for you, Lucy said, killing the engine. Before we reached the porch, the front door swung open. Eleanor Callahan stood there, tall and elegant despite her age, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. So, she said, eyeing me critically, you finally figured it out. The first few days at Eleanor's were a blur of lawyers, police reports, and sleepless nights. Marcus's threats came hourly, texts, emails, calls from blocked numbers, each one more desperate than the last. He's filed for emergency custody, my lawyer said over speakerphone. Claims you're mentally unstable, a danger to Ethan. Eleanor snorted from her armchair. Of course he did. Men like that always play the same cards. He's frozen all the accounts, I said. Even the trust fund for my parents. That's illegal, Lucy interjected. The estate money was transferred months ago, I finished. He had me sign everything over while I was still in the hospital after Ethan's birth. The lawyer's sigh crackled through the speaker. We'll fight it, but these cases take time. And money. That night, I found Eleanor in her study, surrounded by old photographs. Your father was wrong about me, she said without looking up. Just like he was wrong about your mother's accident. My heart stopped. What? Marcus isn't the first man to arrange convenient accidents. She handed me a yellowed newspaper clipping. Your grandfather was very good at making things look unintentional. I scanned the article. A car crash from 30 years ago. My grandmother's sister, dead after her brakes mysteriously failed. Dad thought you abandoned them, I whispered. I was protecting them. Just like you're protecting Ethan now. Eleanor's eyes were sharp. But protection isn't enough. Sometimes you have to fight back. A crash from upstairs cut through the tension. Lucy's scream followed. Avery. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time. Ethan's room was empty, the window open to the storm. On his bed lay his favorite stuffed bear, its head torn off. The cameras caught him, Lucy said, tablet in hand. Marcus. He was gone before the alarm triggered. My legs gave out. Eleanor caught me before I hit the floor. He's showing you what he can do, she said. What he'll take if you don't go back. My phone buzzed, a video message from Marcus. Ethan's bear wasn't the only thing he'd taken. The screen showed papers scattered across his desk, medical records, school reports, photos of me at college parties. Come home, his voice purred, or everyone sees who you really are. Including the judge. How do you think they'll view a mother with your history? He's bluffing, Lucy said, but her voice shook. No, I replied, he's winning. Eleanor's hand gripped my shoulder. Only if you let him. I have nothing left. The words tore from my throat. No money, no proof, no power. He's taken everything. Not everything. Eleanor moved to an old painting on the wall, swung it aside to reveal a safe. Your grandfather taught me one thing, always keep evidence. She pulled out a thick folder. Inside were documents, photos, bank statements, 30 years of carefully gathered proof of financial fraud and worse. Marcus isn't just fighting you, she said. He's fighting a ghost who taught me everything about men like him. And ghosts don't play fair. My phone buzzed again. Marcus, you have 1 hour to decide. After that, everything burns. I looked at the folder in my hands, at Lucy's determined face, at Eleanor's knowing smile. Something cold and certain settled in my chest. Tell him I'm coming home, I said, reaching for my coat. But first, we need to make a stop. Where? Lucy asked. To see Jennifer Bennett. It's time to compare notes. The storm outside grew stronger, but for the first time since leaving Marcus, I felt steady. Sometimes rock bottom isn't an ending. Sometimes it's just the foundation you need to build something stronger. Jennifer Bennett lived in a small apartment above a bookstore 2 states away. Her hair was different, her name was changed, but her eyes held the same haunted look I saw in my mirror every morning. I wondered when you'd find me, she said, letting us in. We spread Eleanor's documents across Jennifer's kitchen table, 3 decades of carefully documented fraud, abuse, and manipulation. Jennifer added her own files, and slowly, a pattern emerged. The accident that killed your parents, Jennifer said quietly. It wasn't the first one Marcus arranged. My phone buzzed. Marcus, 20 minutes left, sweetheart. Clock's ticking. I texted back, coming home. Meet me at the house. Lucy grabbed my arm. You can't go back there. Watch me. I turned to Jennifer. Are you ready? She nodded, her hands shaking but her voice steady. Been ready for 3 years. The drive back felt like moving through a dream. Eleanor's evidence was already with the FBI. Jennifer's testimony was recorded and safe. Everything was in place. Marcus was waiting in our living room, Ethan's torn bear on the coffee table between us. I knew you'd make the right choice, he said, reaching for me. I stepped back. Where's Ethan? Safe. With my sister. His smile turned cold. Where he'll stay until you prove you can be trusted. Like Jennifer proved herself? I watched his face change. Or like my parents proved themselves? Careful, Avery. He moved toward me, but I held my ground. You're emotional. Not thinking clearly. Actually, I'm thinking clearly for the first time since that night at the hospital. I pulled out my phone, showed him the screen. Remember this night, Marcus? The security footage played silently, Marcus arguing with my father outside their house, following their car, making a call moments before the crash. Where did you get that? His mask slipped completely. Eleanor had cameras installed after her sister died the same way. Funny how history repeats itself. You can't prove anything. No. I nodded toward the window. Red and blue lights flashed outside. Jennifer's testimony might help. And the FBI seems very interested in those offshore accounts you set up with my parents' money. Marcus lunged for me, but Lucy appeared in the doorway, Jennifer behind her. His eyes darted between us, calculating. Everything I did was for us, he said. To protect our family. No. My voice was ice. Everything you did was for control. But you made one mistake. What's that? You thought I was weak. Like Jennifer. Like my mother. I stepped closer. But I'm not them. I'm Eleanor's granddaughter, and she taught me how to fight back. The FBI agents burst in before Marcus could respond. As they read him his rights, he kept his eyes locked on mine. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You're nothing without me." I picked up Ethan's bear, carefully reattaching its head. "No, Marcus. I was nothing with you. That was the point." Later, at Eleanor's house, I held Ethan close, watching him sleep. Lucy brought coffee, Jennifer brought blankets, and Eleanor brought perspective. "Your father never knew the truth about his mother," she said, showing me an old letter. "Your grandfather convinced him I abandoned them. By the time I gathered enough evidence to fight back, it was too late. The damage was done. But not this time," I said. "No." Eleanor smiled. "Not this time." My phone buzzed one last time, Marcus's lawyer, offering a deal. Delete the evidence, recant the testimony, and he'd give me full custody of Ethan. I showed the message to Jennifer. She took my phone and typed 2 words, "Not interested." Outside, the storm finally broke. Through the window, I could see stars emerging, bright and clear against the dark sky. Ethan stirred in my arms, safe and whole. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemy. Sometimes it's about rebuilding everything they tried to break, stronger, better, and far beyond their reach. Marcus had taught me about power, but Eleanor, Lucy, and Jennifer had taught me about strength. And in the end, that made all the difference. 1 year later, I stood in Eleanor's attic, surrounded by antique furniture waiting to be restored. Sunlight streamed through the dormer windows, catching dust motes and memories alike. My workshop had become my sanctuary, each piece of furniture a story waiting to be renewed. The news about Marcus came during breakfast. Lucy burst in, waving her phone. "Guilty on all counts," she announced. 15 years minimum. Eleanor looked up from feeding Ethan his oatmeal. "Good. Though prison's too comfortable for men like him." I kept sanding the Victorian desk I was restoring, letting the rhythmic motion calm my racing heart. Did he say anything? Tried to blame everyone else. The judge wasn't buying it. Lucy sat beside Ethan, wiping oatmeal from his chin. Jennifer sends her thanks, by the way. She's finally using her real name again. The doorbell rang, another customer for our growing restoration business. Eleanor's attic treasures had become the foundation of something unexpected: independence. "Mrs. Peterson's here about her grandmother's cabinet," Eleanor called up the stairs. "Coming." I set down my sandpaper, studying my work. The desk had arrived badly damaged, its surface scarred and watermarked. Now the original would gleam through, waiting for its final polish. As I descended the stairs, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. I looked different, stronger, steadier. My father's eyes looked back at me, and for the first time, I understood him better. Sometimes the hardest patterns to break are the ones we inherit. The afternoon brought another visitor, Marcus's sister, Catherine. She stood awkwardly on the porch, clutching a familiar teddy bear. "Found this while cleaning out his place," she said. "Thought Ethan might want it back." I took the bear, now professionally repaired. "Thank you." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have seen what he was doing. Should have stopped him." "We all should have seen something," I replied. The question is what we do after we finally open our eyes. Later, as sunset painted Eleanor's garden in gold, we gathered for our weekly family dinner. Lucy brought wine, Jennifer drove down from her new home 2 towns over, and Eleanor presided over it all like a benevolent queen. To justice, Lucy proposed, raising her glass. To survival, Jennifer added. To family, Eleanor corrected, watching Ethan play with his restored bear. The kind we choose, not the kind that chains us. I touched the letter in my pocket, the one that had explained everything about Eleanor and my father. Their estrangement had been built on lies, just like Marcus's power over me. But unlike my father, I'd gotten the chance to learn the truth in time. "I have news," I announced. "The restoration business is expanding. We've been asked to handle the renovation of the Historical Society's entire collection." "That's wonderful," Lucy exclaimed, but Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "And," she prompted, "and I've decided to go back to school. Part-time for now. Art conservation and restoration." Eleanor smiled, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. Good. About time you started building something for yourself. Speaking of building, Jennifer added, my support group for survivors wants you to come speak next month. Share your story. I hesitated, thinking of all the women out there still trapped in their own versions of my story. Yes, I said finally. I'll come. As night fell, I tucked Ethan into bed in what had been my father's childhood room. The walls still held old photographs, Eleanor's careful documentation of a life interrupted. But now new pictures hung alongside them. Ethan's first steps, Lucy's birthday party, Jennifer's art show opening. My phone buzzed, a message from Marcus's lawyer. Another appeal, another attempt to rewrite history. I deleted it without reading it. Some scars don't fade completely. Some restorations leave traces of damage behind. But as I stood in my workshop the next morning, running my hands over smooth wood and honest repairs, I realized something important. Sometimes the most beautiful pieces are the ones that show where they've been broken and carefully, lovingly put back together. Not perfect, but stronger for the mending.
For as long as I can remember, I, Carla, have been the family's afterthought. Looking back, the signals were there from the beginning, even though they weren't always evident. Sarah, my younger sister, came into the world like a supernova, with dimpled grins and golden locks. She had our parents completely enamored with her from day one. Me, being the reserved one, I was more focused on my chemistry set than on forming friendships. I can very clearly recall my 10th birthday. For weeks, I had been leaving clues in the hopes of getting a new microscope. I ended up looking like a cupcake in a fancy frock instead. I objected, saying, "But Mom, I detest dresses." That's absurd. She smiled, utterly oblivious to the fact that you would look exactly like Sarah. The gap just got wider as we got older. While I immersed myself in studies and experimental experiments, Sarah soared through school thanks to her charm and beautiful looks. Have you heard that Sarah is a prom queen nominee? One night over supper, Mom gushed. That's fantastic, I said, attempting to seem enthusiastic. Well, I took first place in today's science fair. Dad turned back to Sarah and murmured absently, "Oh, that's nice, dear." So have you chosen your dress yet, princess? Year after year, it continued. No matter how big or little my accomplishments were, they were always eclipsed by Sarah's most recent victory. My senior year state science fair was my big break. I had been refining my sustainable biofuels project for months. I couldn't believe what I was hearing when they revealed the winners. Carla Johnson takes first place. Finally, something that even my parents couldn't deny made me happy. Or so I believed. When I broke the news to Mom, she responded absently, "That's great, honey, but we are unable to attend the awards ceremony. You are aware of how significant that day is to Sarah since she has a dancing recital." As my award accumulated dust on a shelf, I observed them fussing over Sarah's cosmetics and outfit. Although I was growing accustomed to it, it was a difficult pill to swallow. I was so thrilled to receive a full scholarship to a renowned institution that I could not control my enthusiasm when the acceptance letters began to arrive. It exceeded my wildest expectations. "Dad, Mom," I entered. I waved the note as I rushed into the living room. Everything and the full ride. Mom's eyes lifted from her magazine. "That's lovely, my love." "Sarah, you mentioned that you wanted assistance choosing a prom dress, right?" Suddenly, my moment of greatness was dismissed once more. "But the scholarship is full." I made another attempt, but this time I spoke more quietly. Dad gave me an involuntary shoulder pat. "Well done, child. Princess Sarah, let's go shopping. You can't simply show up to prom wearing anything, can you?" With my acceptance letter crumpled in my fingers, I watched them cram themselves into the car. Even though it was a familiar sensation, it still hurt. With great expectations, I packed my luggage and left for college despite my family's lack of hoopla. For the first time, I could be myself without the shadow of Sarah. College was enlightening. My love of science was no longer seen as strange or odd. Rather, it was valued and even revered. Determined to take full use of this chance, I poured myself back into my studies. Sarah, meanwhile, pursued the career our parents had always envisioned. With a preference for partying over academics, she enrolled in the nearby community college. During one of our few phone conversations, she said, "College is so hard. Carla, I'm not sure how you manage." I resisted the temptation to suggest that she may find it easier if she studied more and partied less. I simply shifted the topic and muttered some ambiguous encouragement instead. My sophomore year was when Sarah revealed her shocking revelation. She exclaimed over the phone, "I'm engaged. Mike made a proposal yesterday evening. Isn't that romantic?" Her high school lover, Mike, had once asked me whether science was really that difficult and such. "That's fantastic, Sarah," I said, attempting to seem more excited. "Have you decided on a date?" She said, "We're thinking right after graduation." "Oh, Carla, it will be flawless. Will you be my maid of honor?" As you may assume, the wedding was perfect. Mike was uneasy in his tux, Sarah was glowing, and I stood there in my frilly pink nightmare, forcing a grin for the pictures. Isn't this ideal? At the reception, Mom whispered to me, "Every mother wishes for her daughter to have this." I wanted to ask if she'd ever dreamed anything for me, but I held my tongue. It was Sarah's day after all. As I threw myself into my studies and later my career, Sarah's life seemed to follow a script straight out of our parents' dreams. Within a year of her wedding, she announced her first pregnancy. "I'm going to be a grandmother," Mom squealed over the phone. "Oh, Carla, isn't it wonderful?" I murmured my congratulations, trying to ignore the implicit question in her voice. "When are you going to settle down, Carla? When will you give us grandchildren?" Emma arrived 9 months later, a bundle of pink blankets and loud cries. I flew home for the weekend, dutifully cooing over my new niece and enduring the not-so-subtle hints from my parents. "You know, Carla," Dad said, bouncing Emma on his knee, "you're not getting any younger. Don't you want this for yourself?" I gritted my teeth. "I'm focused on my career right now, Dad." "Career is all well and good, dear," Mom clucked her tongue, "but family is what really matters." I bit back a retort about how they'd never seemed to care much about my career before. Instead, I plastered on a smile and changed the subject. 2 years later, Liam joined the family. Once again, I played the role of the doting aunt, all while fielding questions about my own lack of family. Meanwhile, I was making strides in my career as a biotechnologist. Long hours and hard work paid off, and by 30, I was a senior researcher. My parents' response to this news? A distracted, "That's nice, dear," as they cooed over new pictures of Emma and Liam. It was around this time that I decided to buy a house. I'd saved carefully, living frugally while my colleagues splurged on expensive cars and vacations. When I finally found the perfect place, a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood, I was over the moon. "Mom, Dad, I bought a house," I announced during our next phone call. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A house," Mom repeated. "All by yourself?" "Yes, all by myself," I said, my excitement deflating a little. "It's a great investment." "But it's such a big house for one person," Mom interrupted. "What will you do with all that space?" I sighed. "I'll enjoy it, Mom. It's mine." "Well," she said, her tone making it clear she didn't approve, "I suppose if that's what you want." "Oh, did I tell you Emma lost her first tooth yesterday?" And just like that, we were back to talking about Sarah and her kids. The months following my house purchase were a whirlwind of work and settling into my new home. I threw myself into decorating, turning each room into a reflection of my personality. It was during this time that I started to feel a shift in my family dynamics. The usual calls from my parents became less frequent, and when they did call, there was an odd tension in their voices. One evening, I received a call from my mother. "Carla, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "we're having a family dinner next week. You'll be there, won't you? We need to talk." I agreed, my suspicions raised. In my family, "we need to talk" usually meant trouble was brewing. The night of the dinner arrived, and I pulled up to my parents' house with a sense of foreboding. Sarah's car was already in the driveway, and I could hear the excited shrieks of Emma and Liam from inside. Dinner was a tense affair. My parents kept exchanging glances, and Sarah seemed unusually quiet. Mike, Sarah's husband, kept clearing his throat as if he wanted to say something but thought better of it. Finally, as we were finishing dessert, my father cleared his throat. "Carla, we need to talk about something important." Here it comes, I thought. "What's up, Dad?" He glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, you see, sweetie, we've been thinking that big house of yours, it's really too much for just one person." I felt my hackles rise. "Dad, we've been over this. I like my house. It's mine." "Yes, but," he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. My mother jumped in. "What your father is trying to say is that Sarah and her family need more space. The kids are growing, and their apartment is getting cramped." I looked at Sarah, who was suddenly very interested in her plate. "Okay, and we think," my mother continued, her voice sickly sweet, "that since you're single and have no children, you should give your house to Sarah and her family. Just give them the keys and move out." For a moment, I was speechless. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to yell "gotcha" and reveal it was all a joke. But all I saw were expectant faces. "You can't be serious." I finally managed. "Now, Carla," my mother said, her tone patronizing, "don't be selfish. Sarah needs her own space more than you do." "Selfish?" I repeated, my voice rising. "How is it selfish to want to keep the house I worked hard for and paid for myself? It's your sisterly duty to help in times of need," my father chimed in. I turned to Sarah, who was still avoiding my gaze. "What do you have to say about this?" She shrugged, finally meeting my eyes. "Well, it would be nice to have more space for the kids." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own family asking me to give up my home, acting like I was the unreasonable one for refusing. "No," I said firmly, standing up. "Absolutely not. I'm not giving up my house." As I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, I heard my father call out, "Think about it, Carla. Family should come first." The days following that disastrous family dinner were a blur of disbelief and anger. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, unable to believe my family's audacity. How could they even think to ask such a thing? My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from my parents and Sarah, but I ignored them all. On the third day, as I was trying to focus on work, my phone lit up with a call from a number I didn't recognize. Figuring it wasn't family, I answered. "Hello, is this Carla?" A woman's voice came through, sounding disapproving. "Yes, who's this?" "This is your Aunt Mildred." "I can't believe what I'm hearing about you, young lady. Your poor sister needs a home for her children, and you're living all alone in that big house. Shame on you." I felt my blood pressure rising. "Aunt Mildred, that's not." "In my day," she continued, not letting me get a word in, "family helped family." We didn't hoard our resources like misers. I'm not hoarding anything, I snapped. It's my house. I bought it with my own money. Well, she huffed. If you're not going to use all that space, you should at least consider donating your eggs. It's not like you're using them anyway. I was so shocked I nearly dropped the phone. Excuse me. You heard me, she said primly. You're not getting any younger, you know. Tick-tock. I hung up without another word, my hand shaking with anger. How dare she? How dare any of them? But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I was bombarded with calls and messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Each one had an opinion on what I should do with my house and my life. My great-aunt Edna left a voicemail. Carla dear, it's your great-aunt Edna. I just wanted to say it's not too late to find a nice man and settle down. Then you'd need that big house. It was relentless. Every ping of my phone brought a new judgment, a new guilt trip. I felt like I was going crazy. I started to dread checking my phone, wincing every time it buzzed. I threw myself into work, staying late at the lab just to avoid going home to more messages. It was during one of these late nights at work that I got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad cold, but enough that my boss insisted I take a few days off to recover. So there I was, curled up on my couch with a box of tissues, feeling miserable both physically and emotionally. My phone had been mercifully quiet for a few hours, and I was just starting to relax when I heard it. A noise at my front door, like someone was fumbling with the lock. My heart started racing. Was someone trying to break in? I got up as quietly as I could, creeping towards the door. Through the window, I could see figures on my porch, familiar figures. I yanked the door open, startling the people on the other side. What the hell are you doing here? Caught red-handed were my parents and Sarah. They looked like deer caught in headlights, frozen in the act of trying to break into my home. My mother was the first to recover. Carla, dear, we were just worried about you. You haven't been answering your phone. So you decided to break into my house. I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. My father at least had the decency to look embarrassed. We didn't think you'd be home. We thought you'd be at work. And that makes it okay. I was practically shouting now. What were you planning to do? Move Sarah in while I was gone? Sarah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Carla, you're being hysterical. We were just going to wait for you to come home. I noticed for the first time that there was a car parked behind them, loaded with boxes and furniture. My blood ran cold as I realized the full extent of their plan. You were going to move in, I said, my voice flat. You were actually going to move into my house without my permission. Now, Carla, my mother started, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well. We've discussed this. Sarah needs the space more than you do. We thought if we just took the initiative. You thought wrong. I cut her off. This is my house. Mine, I bought it with my own money, money I earned through hard work. You have no right to it. Just then, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. My neighbors, the Johnsons, were peering out their window, clearly concerned by the commotion. Mr. Johnson caught my eye and held up his phone, signaling police. I nodded, grateful for their concern. Turning back to my family, I said, I've called the police. You need to leave now. You wouldn't, my father scoffed. Your own family. As if on cue, the sound of sirens filled the air. My family's faces paled as the police car pulled up and 2 officers got out. Is there a problem here? One of them asked, eyeing the scene warily. I took a deep breath. Yes, officer, these people were attempting to break into my home. Carla, my mother gasped. How could you? The officers looked at my family. Is this true? My father started to stammer out an explanation, but the officer held up a hand. Sir, attempting to enter a property without the owner's permission is a serious offense. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave immediately. As the officers escorted my family off my property, I stood in the doorway, shaking. I couldn't believe it had come to this. You'll regret this, Carla. Sarah called over her shoulder as they were leaving. You'll end up old and alone. I slammed the door shut, sliding down to sit on the floor, my back against it. Tears started to flow freely now, a mix of anger, hurt, and relief. My phone had fallen silent. No more calls from distant relatives, no more guilt-tripping messages. It was as if I'd been excommunicated from the family. Part of me was relieved, but another part ached for the connection. Dysfunctional as it had been, it was in this tumultuous state that I received an unexpected message. It was from my Aunt Maggie, my mother's sister. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she'd had a falling out with my mom over some old family drama. I'll meet you tomorrow at Cafe Blue at 4:00 hours. Intrigued and desperate for any ally, I agreed to meet her. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Aunt Maggie in a cozy corner of Cafe Blue. She looked older than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp and kind. Carla, she began, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I'm so sorry for what you've been through. Your mother called me trying to get me on her side, but there's more to this story than you know. That's why I asked you to meet me. My curiosity piqued. I leaned forward. What do you mean? Aunt Maggie took a deep breath. Your parents and Sarah, they are in serious financial trouble. Sarah and Mike have been living beyond their means for years. Luxury cars, designer clothes, lavish vacations, all on credit. I shook my head in disbelief. But why? How? It's worse than that, Aunt Maggie continued. Mike has a gambling problem, a bad one. He's been secretly draining their accounts for years. The pieces started to fall into place, the desperate attempt to get my house, the constant pressure. But what about Mom and Dad? I asked. Aunt Maggie's face grew grim. They lost a significant amount of money in a pyramid scheme a few years back. They've been barely keeping their heads above water. They were planning to move in with Sarah and Mike as soon as they got your house. I sat back stunned. How do you know all this? I work at the bank where they all have accounts, Aunt Maggie explained. I noticed some suspicious activity and started digging. When I confronted your mother about it, she cut me out of the family. My mind was reeling. All this time, while I'd been working hard and saving, my family had been digging themselves into a hole, and they tried to drag me down with them. Carla, Aunt Maggie said gently, I know this is a lot to take in, but I think it's time we did something about this situation, if you're willing. I have an idea. Armed with the information Aunt Maggie had shared, we decided to dig deeper. We hired a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Diana who came highly recommended. For weeks, we waited anxiously as Diana worked her magic. Finally, she called us in for a meeting. What she revealed left us speechless. Mike, Sarah's husband, had been leading a double life. He was involved in an affair with none other than my cousin Jenny, Uncle Bob's daughter. He's been funneling money to her for months, Diana explained, showing us bank statements and hotel receipts. Expensive gifts, weekend getaways, you name it. But where did he get the money? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Diana's face grew grim. From his gambling wins and from your parents. Aunt Maggie and I exchanged shocked glances. The betrayal ran deeper than we'd imagined. We decided to host a family gathering at my house. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very house they had tried to take from me would be the stage for their undoing. The day of the gathering arrived. I watched as my family members trickled in, their faces a mix of curiosity and smugness. They probably thought I was going to cave to their demands. Once everyone was seated, I stood up, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. "I've called you all here today because there are some things you need to know," I began. I laid out everything: the financial troubles, the gambling, the affair. With each revelation, I watched the color drain from their faces. Sarah jumped up, tears streaming down her face. "It's not true," she screamed before collapsing into sobs. "Mike, tell them it's not true." But Mike was already halfway to the door. Uncle Bob, his face contorted with rage, caught him by the collar. "You son of a," he growled. "That's my daughter you've been fooling around with." My parents sat in stunned silence. The reality of their exposed financial ruin seemed more devastating than the fact that they had tried to steal my house. The relatives who had judged me so harshly began to stammer out apologies. "We had no idea," Aunt Mildred muttered. "Carla, we're so sorry." As the chaos unfolded around me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The truth was out. The lies and manipulations were exposed. In the weeks that followed, our family was turned upside down. Sarah, unable to forgive Mike's infidelity, filed for divorce. With nowhere else to go, she and the kids moved back in with our parents. But their reprieve was short-lived. The bank foreclosed on their house, and they were forced to downsize to a small rented apartment, all 5 of them crammed into a space smaller than my living room. As for me, I watched it all unfold from a distance. After much soul-searching and several tearful nights, I made the difficult decision to sever all ties with my immediate family. "You're doing the right thing, Carla," Aunt Maggie assured me one afternoon over coffee. "It's not easy, but it's necessary for your mental health and well-being." Aunt Maggie had become my rock, the family I chose when my blood relatives had let me down. Our weekly coffee dates became a cornerstone of my new life. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself settling into a new routine. Without the constant drama and demands of my family, I had time to focus on myself. But with that came a startling realization. I was lonely. "You know," Aunt Maggie said one day, "there's a world out there beyond work and home. Why don't you try something new?" With her encouragement, I decided to join a local rock climbing group. It was far outside my comfort zone, but as I strapped on the harness for the first time, I felt a thrill of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. Alex, and I met there. With his powerful hands managing the rope with assurance, he was belaying another climber. My heart skipped a beat as he turned and gave me a loving grin. Observing my anxious fiddling with the apparatus, he said, first time, "Is it really that clear?" I chuckled. We started talking, and his gentle demeanor and warm gaze drew me in right away. I discovered throughout our conversation that he was a wildlife photographer who was passionate about preserving the splendor of the natural world. I was excited about the prospect of a relationship for the first time in years. Alex was adventurous, friendly, and had a unique understanding of the intricacies of family dynamics. Our mutual appreciation of nature and comprehension of intricate family dynamics drew us closer together when we started dating. Before I knew it, we were talking about marriage, which at the time seemed alien and unachievable. Aunt Maggie was my rock-solid support system through it all. She turned into the mother figure I had always wanted but never experienced. One day, with hazy eyes, she whispered to me, "Carla, I want you to know something. I have a new will. You will handle everything." Tears were running down my cheeks as I gave her a hug, and I was struck by how drastically my life had changed. Though it hadn't been simple, the journey had brought me to my destiny. With Alex's encouragement, Aunt Maggie's affection, and my newly discovered strength, I was prepared to face whatever was ahead.
Hi, I am Sandra and I am 30 years old. I decided to write about an event that took place recently, which I believe has brought a sense of closure for me over such a difficult time in my life after everything had happened with my husband and his family. That was months ago, and the dust of this chapter has settled by now. I am also still coming to terms with the emotional aftermath, and I feel that sharing my journey may only enable me in spirit. Let's take a step back to 3 years ago when I made a major life choice, marrying my boyfriend, Tyler. We had met through mutual friends and enjoyed 3 wonderful years together before tying the knot. Tyler was always the life of the party, fun, attentive, and loving. He came from a well-to-do family and had a lucrative job, which allowed him to shower me with affection and gifts. Our bond was strengthened by our mutual love for travel. As our relationship evolved from casual dating to something more serious, my friends consistently praised him and delighted for us. Tyler's generosity was overwhelming at times. For instance, he gifted me a new laptop when I graduated from college. Despite his kindness, I often felt uneasy about the imbalance in our financial contributions. "Tyler, I'm just a college student," I'd say. "I can't match your spending. Let me try to split the other costs, at least." Tyler would brush off my concerns, insisting on treating me and arguing that it was common among his friends to pamper their partners. As I gradually accepted his gestures, I also sought ways to contribute within my means. Once I landed a well-paying job post-college, I was eager to reciprocate his generosity. We started sharing expenses more equally and even discussed moving in together. "You can move in with me," Tyler proposed one day. "I inherited my house from my grandpa, so no worries about rent, but we should split other expenses to keep things fair." Despite my reservations, Tyler reassured me of his intentions to take care of me, and so began a new chapter in our lives together. Despite our agreement to fairly share the financial responsibilities considering our differing incomes, things were running smoothly until I had the opportunity to meet Tyler's family, who lived quite far from us. With Tyler tied up with work commitments, he couldn't accompany them, so I was left to host his parents and sister by myself. Before their arrival, Tyler had given me a heads up about their judgmental tendencies, but didn't go into details. He simply suggested that I should play along and ignore any potentially hurtful comments. With this in mind, I decided to approach the meeting with optimism. However, any hint of positivity vanished as soon as Tyler's family arrived. Instead of the warm welcome I had hoped for, Tyler's parents and sister showed up visibly annoyed. This stark contrast to my expectations set a tense atmosphere right from the start. As we gathered and conversation ensued, it became clear that they harbored negative opinions about me. "So, you're the woman Tyler has been seeing? I didn't expect to find you in this house. Do you even pay rent?" Martha, Tyler's mother, asked with a tone of disapproval. "No, Martha, I don't pay rent. Tyler mentioned that the house is fully paid for, but we split all other bills evenly," I explained, hoping to clear up any misunderstandings. Martha quickly dismissed my explanation, retorting, "Just because the house is paid for doesn't mean you can mooch off him. This is his house, not yours. Remember that for the rest of your life." The conversation became increasingly uncomfortable, especially with his sister Teresa, who seemed more interested in glaring at me than engaging in dialogue. When I tried to include her by asking about her life, she responded with irritation, mentioning her marriage to a wealthy billionaire back home. Despite my efforts to bridge the gap, she simply brushed me off. Throughout their visit, Tyler offered no support and seemed to align himself with his family's sentiments. Gabriel and Martha continued to criticize me, making the entire experience quite challenging. Tyler's family expressed disapproval over my spending habits, particularly my purchases of makeup and skincare products. They felt that indulging in such luxuries was inappropriate, given what they perceived as my insufficient contributions to the household. Their skepticism about my financial dependence on Tyler grew, partly fueled by Tyler's remarks. For example, he would offhandedly comment, "You know, Sandra was a struggling student when we first met," implying that I had relied heavily on him financially, even though this was not entirely accurate. Tyler would recount how he had covered all expenses early in our relationship because my job at the time didn't support what he called my taste for luxury. I was taken aback by these comments and reminded him that we had since adjusted our arrangement to split our bills equally. I explained that I had lived simply both before and during our relationship, and that any luxury items I had were gifts from him, gifts I had often cautioned him against due to their extravagance. Yet Tyler justified his lavish spending by claiming his social status required him to present extravagant gifts, revealing that his generosity was more about showing off to his friends than genuine care. Their visit left me with a sour taste, prompting me to confront Tyler about the entire ordeal after they left. Unfortunately, he shrugged it off, suggesting I was overthinking things. "Don't take it to heart, Sandra. They meant well. What they said was not meant to be taken so seriously. Relax, you're overreacting." He dismissed my concerns. Despite my reservations, 5 months later, Tyler proposed, and in a moment of happiness, I accepted. We planned an engagement party and decided to split the expenses evenly. Meanwhile, I was running a small business on the side, which Tyler knew was growing, but he never really inquired about its earnings. To me, it was more of a fulfilling hobby than a significant moneymaker. When it came time to organize our engagement party, I decided it was an occasion to treat myself a bit. Tyler supported this idea, and we managed the expenses together, ensuring an equal contribution from both sides. I even took on the expense of covering plane tickets for my extended family to attend our engagement party. However, as the celebrations unfolded, the earlier criticisms resurfaced. "You shouldn't have splurged so much on this party, Sandra. You're draining Tyler's account before you're even married. At this rate, you'll end up with a backyard wedding. I thought you were financially irresponsible, but it's worse than I thought," they criticized. I stood my ground and firmly responded to Martha. The party was extravagant, but we both agreed to it. I paid my share, and it was actually your son's idea to include everyone. Tyler had insisted a lot, and I couldn't say no. He mentioned he didn't mind the expense, but the criticism continued, with Martha accusing me of manipulating Tyler into spending more than he should. Teresa chimed in too, asserting that she knew what kind of person I was, and that I should have been more considerate. Frustrated and needing a break from the tension, I excused myself and sought a moment of peace on the venue's lawn. There, I overheard Teresa and her husband Justin laughing about the situation at my expense. It felt as though my engagement party was falling apart, with Tyler seemingly oblivious to his family's harsh judgments. Most of his extended family assumed I was jobless, painting me as a dependent fiancé. Noticing my distress, my mom, always perceptive and protective, approached me. Aware of the challenges of managing finances as a single parent, she urged me to reconsider the engagement, pointing out the ongoing mean comments from Tyler's family. After the party, I confronted Tyler about the situation. He brushed it off as a joke, expressing his love and stating that financial matters didn't concern him. However, I reiterated my desire to contribute more significantly, especially towards expenses like rent, but he dismissed the suggestion. As we moved forward with wedding planning, the stress intensified. Tyler's parents continued to criticize my choices, accusing me of bankrupting their son. The constant scrutiny and accusations made the engagement period increasingly challenging. I made it clear that everyone, including my mom, was pitching in for the wedding expenses. However, Martha sharply accused me of taking advantage of her son and suggested that we were on a mission to deplete his bank account. Amid these accusations, my in-laws unfairly branded me a gold digger. I addressed Gabriel calmly to alleviate his concerns. "Gabriel, I'm not asking for any financial help. I just want to ensure you understand that we are completely capable of financing the wedding ourselves." Despite my explanations, Teresa didn't hold back her critiques about the cost of my dress and makeup on the wedding day, even though I had previously clarified that those expenses were covered by my mother. The ceremony itself unfolded without a hitch, but at the reception, Martha and Gabriel did not miss any opportunity to criticize my spending habits, accusing me of financially exploiting their son. Despite their harsh words, I chose to remain silent to avoid any conflict that might ruin our special day. A few months later, Tyler celebrated a significant promotion at work, and he was eager to mark the occasion with a grand family dinner. I was excited for him and decided to make the event even more special by covering all the expenses myself. "Tyler, I want this dinner to be something extraordinary. I'm so proud of you, and I want to celebrate your success," I told him enthusiastically. Tyler appreciated my gesture, and I shared with him that my business was flourishing. I had a stable income from my job, and I had recently accessed a trust fund from my paternal grandfather. I meticulously planned the whole event to ensure everything was perfect for the celebration. However, when his family arrived, they were visibly unhappy with the arrangements. Despite receiving positive feedback from other guests, it soon became apparent that they had reservations about the foolishness of the celebration. During the speeches, Martha took the opportunity to stand up. Her voice carried across the room as she began, "I want to thank everyone for gathering here to celebrate my son. He's incredibly hardworking and generous, and truly deserving of this promotion. Unfortunately, it seems his good fortune did not extend to his choice of a partner. It's unfortunate that of all people, he found himself tied to what some might call a gold digger. I only wish he had seen the true nature of his wife earlier, then he wouldn't have to work so hard to support her lavish lifestyle." She continued, her tone tinged with regret. "It's now painfully obvious to everyone here that his wife has been quite extravagant. From the engagement party to tonight's dinner, it seems she has nearly drained his accounts." Feeling the sting of her words, I took a deep breath and steeled myself. Martha added, "Thank goodness we had Sandra sign a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. At least some of his assets are protected." She sighed, seemingly relieved, expressing that it was a good thing her son had married someone who could at least maintain the image of a trophy wife. Tyler chimed in, agreeing with his mother. "I can't even afford to spend money on myself anymore. There's nothing left," he lamented, comparing my behavior unfavorably to what he imagined another's response might be in a similar situation. In shock and frustration at the unfolding scene, I finally spoke up. "Do you really think I'm a gold digger?" Tyler's response was cutting. "Your lifestyle is quite damaging to my bank account." Feeling hurt, yet determined to clarify the misconceptions, I decided to confront the accusation directly. "Since I'm such a gold digger to you all, let me just show you my bank balance. Perhaps that will clear things up," I declared, revealing my financial independence to everyone present. The room fell into disbelief amidst the heated accusations. Martha pointedly accused, "Did you steal my son's money?" To which Tyler added suspiciously, "She must have taken it from you. Frustrated yet calm, I responded, "I don't need to steal money from your son. This is all from my efforts. Besides, I recently accessed a trust fund left by my grandfather. I had plans to use it to buy a bigger house and surprise Tyler, but given the current circumstances, that seems unlikely now." Despite my attempt to clarify the situation, Tyler, seemingly ignoring the tension, suggested, "We can still buy the house. It'll be a wonderful gift." However, I was firm in my resolve, expressing my refusal to accept such a gift under the current conditions. "This is not happening. Your family has insulted me for too long, and you've never once stood up for me. Instead, you've let these misconceptions about how I'm supposedly using your money spread," I asserted, my frustration evident. Tyler tried to downplay the situation, claiming I was overreacting, but I stood my ground. "No, I am not overreacting. Everyone here knows what your family has been calling me. They were here when you allowed them to insult me during our engagement party." Feeling the cumulative burden of disrespect and humiliation over the years, I reached a breaking point. I could no longer tolerate the toxic environment and sternly told Tyler, "I want a divorce." As he attempted to plead and explain, my mom intervened, advising him to remain silent. "You never defended my daughter all these years. It's time she ends this toxic relationship for good," she declared firmly. We left the party, leaving behind a crowd of shocked attendees whispering among themselves. Despite the dramatic revelation in front of Tyler's extended family, friends, and colleagues, I no longer cared. I was resolute in my decision to leave him and move on from the relationship. My mom's support was unwavering as we exited, marking the end of a painful chapter in my life. After the tumultuous confrontation, I went straight to our shared home, gathered my belongings, and while Tyler persistently tried to reach me, I muted my phone and went to stay with my mother for solace. The next day, I reached out to my cousin, who was a lawyer, to begin drafting the divorce papers. With a prenuptial agreement already in place, the process promised to be straightforward, sparing me the need to share any of my now substantial financial assets with Tyler. However, the situation escalated when Tyler and his family appeared at my mother's doorstep, demanding a conversation. My mother stood firm, instructing them to leave. Meanwhile, Tyler continued his attempts to contact me, his messages oscillating between tearful apologies and unsettling threats. I saved all these communications, preparing to file for a restraining order if necessary. Amid this emotional chaos, my mother's unwavering support gave me strength. Tyler even attempted to confront me at my office, but having informed security in advance, they promptly escorted him out. It was then I decided to leave my well-paying job. My thriving business meant I no longer needed the position, and my aspirations were no longer about accumulating wealth, but seeking a peaceful, dignified life. Thus, I handed in my resignation that very day and began to move forward. Only a week after, I had the divorce papers served to Tyler at his workplace. He appeared at my old office, only to find that I had already resigned. My former colleagues reported his continued attempts to send flowers and gifts to my mother's house, which we consistently returned. The ongoing harassment led me to consider relocating. With my mother's encouragement, I found an ideal house in the next state, providing a sanctuary away from my ex. Currently, as I await the finalization of the divorce paperwork, the judge has already facilitated a smooth proceeding thanks to the solid prenuptial agreement. During the 5 months of our separation, I took the time to collect myself and prepare for a new chapter in my life, free from turmoil and filled with renewed hope. I quickly settled into my new home, taking the significant step of changing my number to avoid the incessant barrage of messages from Tyler and his family. I heard through the grapevine that Tyler's life was unraveling. He blamed his parents for the downfall of our marriage, and professionally, he faced a significant setback. His colleagues began to distance themselves, and his seniors were displeased with the negative publicity in their close-knit community. His parents didn't help matters, spreading infidelity rumors, but thankfully, these baseless accusations failed to gain any traction. In contrast to Tyler's downward spiral, my life began to flourish. I focused on growing my business and relishing my newfound freedom. I started going out more and even dipped my toes back into the dating scene. Tyler's past insecurities made me wary of committing too quickly, but I remained hopeful that in time I would heal and find someone who truly values and cherishes me. While Tyler's actions caused me considerable pain, the strength I gained from overcoming those challenges has propelled me into a brighter future, full of possibilities and self-discovery. I look forward to what lies ahead, confident in my resilience, and more aware of what I seek in relationships and life.
I'm Julia, and I want to share a tale with you. I was raised in a typical family consisting of my mother, father, and younger sister, Lily. That sounds good, doesn't it? Not all was sunshine and rainbows, though. Lily was challenging, to say the least. If she didn't get her way, she would yell bloody murder, and boy, did she know how to manipulate our parents. They would go out of their way to prevent her from having one of her well-known outbursts. My mother would say, "Julia, honey," in a strained voice, "would you mind giving Lily the last cookie?" You are aware of her temperament. Since I had nothing better to do, I would nod. Being the quiet one, I was the nice girl. I quickly discovered that it was simpler to blend in than to contend with Hurricane Lily. The routine remained the same as we got older. Lily made demands, our parents gave in, and I simply tried to keep out of the way. I lost myself in my studies and literature, hoping to one day escape from it all. When I was accepted to college on a full scholarship, that day finally arrived. I was both excited about the new life that awaited me and guilty about leaving my parents to take care of Lily by myself as I packed my luggage. However, I suppressed that guilt. I had to start living my own life. My mother gave me a strong hug the next morning as I packed my whole belongings into my dilapidated old automobile. The woman murmured, "Julia, we're so proud of you. You're going to do great things." Dad gave me a shoulder clap while his eyes were strangely bright. "Remember, you can always come home if you need to." Unconfident in my ability to talk, I nodded. With her arms folded and silent, Lily observed from the porch. It was refreshing to go to college. I didn't have to compromise my desires or tread carefully around people's sentiments for the first time in my life. Determining to take use of this chance, I immersed myself into my studies. Life at home, however, went on as usual. As expected, Lily chose not to move out. Instead, shortly after graduating, she with Tom, her high school love. Furthermore, where did they choose to reside? Naturally, with our parents. Mom would occasionally contact me, sounding exhausted but attempting to seem positive. She would remark, "Lily and Tom are still settling in. It's nice having the grandkids around." However, I was able to decipher the following. Our parents were being used by Lily as a free daycare and housekeeping service. She would quickly give birth to 2 children while never working. Yes, Tom worked, but he wasn't exactly earning a lot of money, based on what I could tell. I once heard Lily and Mom conversing in the kitchen on a rare visit home. "Can you keep an eye on the kids tonight? Mom, I want to go out with Tom." "Lily, honey, your father and I had plans." Oh, hurry up. You don't seem to have any significant tasks to do. We don't have any nights off. Mom's shoulders slumped into disappointment as I peered over the corner. All right, sweetheart. We'll keep an eye on them. I was furious, but what could I say? After all, I was the one who had gone, so I kept my mouth shut and concentrated on my own affairs. I was hired as a manager for a multinational corporation after I graduated. It wasn't easy. I put in a lot of overtime, took on extra tasks, and did everything it needed to advance. However, it was worthwhile. After a few years, Lily was requesting that our parents purchase her food, and I was in charge of my area. I was trying to save as much money as possible. I didn't go out on crazy nights or buy nice clothes, but I gradually increased my savings. The apartment arrived first. It was a modest one-bedroom flat, nothing special, but it was mine. I can still picture myself standing in the empty living room on the day I received the keys, barely believing it was real. Then the vehicle, again, not particularly fancy, but dependable and fully paid for. I worked hard and kept my head down the entire time. It wasn't a big deal that I didn't have a social life. I was creating something for myself that would last forever. I wasn't very interested in dating. I occasionally went out, but not too often. Until I met Jake, that is. Jake was unique from the beginning. He didn't use upscale dining establishments or slick conversation to attempt to impress me. Rather, he pushed me, made me laugh, and, above all, he appreciated my motivation. "You're something else, Julia," he said with a shake of his head during our third date. "Most people would be burned out working as hard as you do, but you're thriving." I shrugged, feeling a bit awkward about the compliment. "I just know what I want, that's all." He grabbed my hand from across the table. "Well, I know what I want too, and it's you." My painstakingly built barriers began to come apart for the first time in years. Perhaps, just possibly, there was more to my existence than job and financial savings. Before he ultimately proposed, Jake and I dated for a few years. To be honest, I was initially apprehensive. I had never really thought about marriage. I had always prioritized my work and financial security. However, Jake managed to make me see beyond my self-imposed limitations. The day of the wedding arrived, and despite my reservations, I was excited. This was my day, after all. I was marrying the man I loved. Then Lily showed up. My sister waltzed into the bridal suite wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously bridal. "Oh, Julia," she exclaimed, twirling around. "Don't you love my dress? I wanted to look my best for your big day." I stared at her, speechless. Was she seriously trying to upstage me at my own wedding? "Lily," I finally managed, "don't you think that dress is a bit inappropriate for a bridesmaid?" She pouted, looking around at our cousins who were helping me get ready. "What do you mean?" "I think I look great. Don't I look great, girls?" Our cousins, not wanting to cause a scene, mumbled awkward agreements. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this was my day. I wasn't going to let Lily's antics ruin it. "It's fine," I said, turning back to the mirror. "Let's just get this show on the road." The ceremony itself was beautiful. Jake's eyes lit up when he saw me walking down the aisle. And in that moment, all the stress and family drama faded away. This was about us, about our love, and our future together. But at the reception, things got interesting. More than once, I overheard guests asking Lily if she was the bride. She'd giggle and say, "Oh no, that's my sister. But doesn't this dress look amazing on me?" Jake, bless him, did his best to keep me calm. "Don't let it get to you," he whispered, squeezing my hand. "Everyone knows you're the star of this show." And he was right. Despite Lily's best efforts, the day was still ours. We danced, we laughed, we celebrated with our friends and family. And at the end of the night, as Jake and I drove off to start our honeymoon, I felt a sense of peace. After the wedding, Jake and I settled into a rhythm. We moved into his apartment, which was bigger and in a nicer area than mine. I decided to keep my old place and rent it out, just another investment for the future, I thought. I threw myself back into work with renewed energy. Jake was supportive, always there with a cup of coffee when I was burning the midnight oil or a shoulder to lean on when deals fell through. But it wasn't just about work anymore. I started looking into investments, particularly securities. It was a whole new world, full of risks and potential rewards, and payoff it did. 5 years flew by, and suddenly we found ourselves sitting on a decent nest egg. That's when I had an idea. Let's buy a vacation home, I suggested to Jake one evening. Somewhere my parents could use too, to get away from everything. Jake knew what I meant by everything. My sister, her husband, their 3 kids. It was a lot for my parents to handle. We found the perfect place. A beautiful villa on a lake just outside the city. It had everything: a large barbecue area, a sprawling terrace, 3 bedrooms, and a view that took your breath away. The moment I saw it, I knew it was the one. The day we closed the deal, I called my parents. "Mom, Dad, I've got a surprise for you," I said, barely containing my excitement. When they arrived at the villa, my mom's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Julia," she whispered, looking around in awe. This is too much." Dad was speechless, running his hand along the smooth kitchen countertop like he couldn't believe it was real. "It's not too much," I insisted. "You deserve this. A place to relax, to get away from." "From your sister," Dad finished, a hint of guilt in his voice. I nodded, but listen, there's one thing. Can we not tell Lily that I bought this? Can we say it's yours, that you bought it with your savings? Mom looked confused. But why? I sighed, thinking about the phone call I'd had with Lily just the day before. She'd asked to borrow money for a car, and I'd said no. I could only imagine how she'd react if she found out about this place. "It's just easier this way," I said. "Please." They agreed, albeit reluctantly. Little did I know the storm this white lie would stir up. A few days later, I got a call from Mom. She sounded exhausted. "Lily found out about the villa," she said. "She wants us to sell it, says we should give her the money instead, so she can buy a sports car and travel the world." I could feel my blood pressure rising. "What did you say?" We said no, of course. "But Julia, it was bad." She screamed, she cried, said we loved you more, that we always favored you. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar mixture of guilt and frustration. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I never meant to cause trouble." "It's not your fault, sweetie," Mom said, but I could hear the weariness in her voice. "Your father and we've decided to move to the villa full-time. We just can't do this anymore." As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. My parents were finally standing up for themselves, finally taking a step back from Lily's chaos. But at the same time, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. I knew this wasn't the end of it. Lily wouldn't let this go without a fight. It was a sunny Saturday when Jake and I decided to surprise my parents with a visit to the villa. But as we got closer, something felt off. The sound of loud music filled the air, and I could see cars parked haphazard on the lawn. We pulled up to the villa, and the scene that greeted us was chaos. People were everywhere, drinking, laughing, kids running around screaming. And right in the middle of it all was Lily, holding court like she owned the place. When she saw us, her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" I looked around, trying to spot my parents. Where's Mom and Dad? Lily waved her hand dismissively. Oh, Mom's out walking with the kids. Dad's gone to get more meat for the barbecue. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You sent them out while you're having a party. It's a celebration, Lily exclaimed. We're christening the new family vacation home. Not that you'd understand, Miss Workaholic. I felt my blood begin to boil. Lily, this isn't. She cut me off. Look, Julia, why don't you and Jake just leave? Your sour face is going to ruin everyone's mood. I stood there speechless. Jake put his hand on my arm. Come on, he said quietly. Let's go. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the image of Lily lording over my villa, the villa I'd bought for our parents. I can't believe her, I fumed. Using Mom and Dad like that, treating the place like it's hers. Jake sighed. Maybe it's just a one-time thing. But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, I heard from Mom about the constant stream of parties and get-togethers Lily was hosting at the villa. When she wasn't partying, she was dumping her kids on our parents. The kids are missing school. Mom confided in me during one of our calls. She sounded exhausted. Lily says it's not a big deal for Tommy. He's only 4. But Emily and Jack are falling behind. By the way, I forgot to mention that Lily gave birth to her 3rd child shortly after my wedding. I'd had enough. The next time I saw Lily, I confronted her. You need to stop taking advantage of Mom and Dad, I said. They're not your personal babysitters, and the kids need to be in school. Lily rolled her eyes. Don't be such a killjoy, Julia. Mom and Dad love having the kids around. But I could see the toll it was taking on our parents. They looked tired, worn down. This wasn't the peaceful retirement I'd envisioned for them when I bought the villa. After several more failed attempts to reason with Lily, I made a difficult decision. I contacted Child Protective Services. The investigation was quick and discreet. Lily got a formal reprimand, and suddenly the kids were back in school full-time. The endless parties at the villa stopped too. Mom called me a few days later. Things have calmed down, she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Your father and I are actually getting to enjoy the place now. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was what I'd wanted all along, for my parents to have a peaceful place to retire. But my relief was short-lived. The next time I saw Lily, her eyes were full of venom. I know what you did, she spat. Calling CPS on your own sister. You're a traitor, Julia. I'll never forgive you for this. A few months passed quickly. It was my mom's birthday and Jake, and I decided to surprise her with a weekend visit to the villa. We had visions of a quiet family celebration, maybe a nice dinner on the terrace overlooking the lake. But as we pulled up to the house, those dreams quickly evaporated. The place was in chaos. Music blared from speakers, people were everywhere, and kids were running wild across the lawn. It looked like Lily had invited half the town. We made our way inside, where I found Mom in the kitchen looking exhausted and on the verge of tears. Happy birthday, Mom, I said, giving her a hug. She clung to me a little too tightly. Oh, Julia, she whispered. I just wanted a quiet day with family, but Lily, she invited all these people. Your father and I have been running around all day serving drinks, cooking food. I stepped out onto the lawn, searching for Lily in the crowd, when I spotted her laughing with a group of friends. I marched over. Lily, we need to talk, I said firmly. This is Mom's birthday. She wanted a family day, not this. I gestured at the chaos around us. Lily laughed loudly. Oh, lighten up. Mom loves having people over. Stop being such a buzzkill. Frustrated, I walked over to a group of guests near the speakers. Excuse me, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the music. Could you please turn this down? It's too loud. The guests, clearly drunk, just laughed and turned the volume up higher. As I stood there trying to figure out what to do next, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Lily was huddled with a group of kids, pointing in my direction and giggling. With horror, I realized she was handing them ice cream cones and encouraging them to throw them at me. Before I could react, the first scoop of ice cream flew past my head. I ducked, and it hit a woman behind me square in the face. Chaos erupted. More ice cream was flying, kids were screaming, and adults were yelling. Lily's voice rose above the commotion. "Look what you've done, Julia. You're ruining everything as usual." The crowd, fueled by alcohol and Lily's accusations, started to turn ugly. Men and women were shouting, moving toward Jake and me with clenched fists. I felt Jake's hand on my arm. "Julia, we need to get out of here," he said urgently. But I'd had enough. This was my parents' home, the home I bought for them. This had to stop. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "I'm calling the police," I announced loudly. The police arrived quickly, lights flashing. As it turned out, they'd already received noise complaints from the neighbors. "Who owns this property?" one of the officers asked. I stepped forward. "I do. I'm Julia Johnson. My parents live here, but these people," I gestured to the crowd, "are here without my invitation." The officers nodded and quickly got to work, ushering the drunk guests off the property and warning them about the consequences of starting a fight. As the police cars drove away with the last of the uninvited guests, an eerie silence fell over the villa. The aftermath of the chaotic party was strewn all around, empty bottles, discarded plates, and the lingering tension in the air. Lily stood in the middle of the living room, her face a mix of shock and anger. "What do you mean this is your house?" she demanded, her voice shrill. I took a deep breath. I bought it for Mom and Dad to retire in peace. Lily's eyes narrowed, then suddenly her demeanor changed. A sly smile spread across her face. Well, little Miss Perfect, always full of surprises." She sauntered over to me, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen, Julia, let's forget about this little misunderstanding. I've got a proposition for you." I raised an eyebrow, wary. "What are you talking about?" "This property," Lily gestured around grandly. "It's got potential. Why don't you sign it over to me? I could build a few more houses, rent them out. I've been looking for a passive income opportunity for ages. You've already got your fancy job. Why not help your sister out?" "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "This house is for Mom and Dad. It's not for sale or development." Lily's face darkened. "You'll regret this, Julia. Mark my words." With that, she stormed out, her husband and kids trailing behind her. I turned to Mom, who looked shell-shocked. "I'm so sorry, Mom. This isn't how your birthday was supposed to go." To my surprise, she pulled me into a hug. "Oh, honey, thank you for standing up for us, for everything." I spent the rest of the day helping Mom clean up the mess, but Lily's threat kept echoing in my mind. I knew my sister well enough to know she wouldn't let this go easily. Before Jake and I left, I made a decision. I hired a security company to install hidden cameras around the property and set up an alarm system that would alert my phone if anyone entered the grounds. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with an alert from the villa security system. Someone had entered the property. Worried it might be a false alarm triggered by my parents, I called Mom. "Mom, are you and Dad at the villa?" There was a pause. "No, honey. We're back at the old house. Lily insisted we come help with the kids. We've been here for a week." My heart sank. I told Mom I'd call her back and immediately headed for the villa with Jake. The sight that greeted us was heartbreaking. The beautiful home I'd bought from my parents was in shambles. Furniture was overturned, things were strewn everywhere, and there was even some graffiti on the walls. Fury rose in me as I called the police. When they arrived, I showed them the security footage. There was no doubt it was Lily and her husband vandalizing the property in a drunken rage. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Lily. "You need to drop the charges," she said without preamble. The police brought us in for questioning. They're talking about pressing charges for vandalism and trespassing. "You have to make this go away, Julia." I took a deep breath. "No, Lily. I'm done cleaning up your messes. I'm done being the family peacekeeper at the expense of my own peace. From now on, you can talk to my lawyer." The weeks following the villa incident were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and family drama. I was determined to see this through to finally put an end to Lily's destructive behavior. I had the villa professionally cleaned and repaired, carefully documenting every bit of damage. The bill came to just over $10,000. My lawyer advised me to sue for the full amount, and after some soul-searching, I agreed. The day of the court hearing arrived. I sat on one side of the courtroom, Lily and her husband on the other. She wouldn't even look at me. The judge listened to both sides, reviewed the evidence, including the security camera footage. In the end, his decision was clear. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff," he announced. "The defendants are ordered to pay $10,000 in damages." But that wasn't all. Due to the nature of the crime and the clear evidence, the judge also handed down a suspended sentence for trespassing and property damage. Lily and her family were severely impacted by the trial's aftermath. Her husband, who had previously relied on charm and family ties, was suddenly having trouble finding employment. Even with a suspended criminal record, no one wanted to hire someone with one. Lily had to get a job even though she had never worked a day in her life. Through rumors, I learned that she was working as a waitress at a nearby cafe and that she always returned home fatigued. For my part, I took the tough choice to sever all connections. I stopped communicating with Lily and sent a legal notice prohibiting her from the villa. Although uncomfortable, it was essential. After being released from Lily's incessant demands, Mom and Dad took up residence at the villa full-time. They had undergone a dramatic transformation. They were years younger and more at ease than I had seen them in decades. During one of my weekly visits, Dad said, "We ought to have done this years ago. We enjoy having the grandchildren visit, but now they only stay for a few hours at a time before returning to our quiet existence." As a last act of parental generosity, they had given Lily their old home, but they made it plain that the financial assistance ended there. Lily needed to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet. For me, things were getting better. My friendship with Jake was better than ever and work was going smoothly until we received some unexpected news. One evening, my voice trembling with worry and excitement, I informed Jake, "I'm pregnant." Like a Christmas tree, his face glowed. We both laughed and sobbed simultaneously as he lifted me up and whirled me around. As I compose this, I am 6 months pregnant. We are expecting a daughter child. While preparing the nursery, Jake and I are reading every parenting book we can find. I still occasionally think about Lily. The last I heard, she and her husband were on the verge of divorce due to their continuous arguments. I have sympathy for her because of the mess she has created in her life. However, a greater part of me feels liberated, free from the need to constantly solve her issues and to uphold the peace at the price of my own happiness. My name is Emily, and I never imagined that this is how my life would turn out. When I was growing up, my family was quite normal. Normal for us, anyhow. My dad was always busy with his window frame business, while my mom took care of the house. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Dad rarely talked about work at home. He would come late, kiss Mom, and ask me how school was going. That was all. But I was content in my own little universe, so I didn't mind. I can still recall the day that everything changed. I was 22 years old, just out of college, and attempting to make sense of my life. I heard Dad talking tensely on the phone. "No, not at all. I will not allow you to take over my business." He remarked, "I've worked too hard for this." I couldn't help but listen in, even if I shouldn't have. As I listened, my stomach turned. Dad's business was having problems. Why had he remained silent? I kept a careful eye on him at supper that evening. As he joked with Mom about her overdone pot roast, he appeared normal, but I could see the stress lines around his eyes and the way his grin fell short of his gaze. Something has to be done, but what? I had absolutely no business knowledge. Still, I couldn't watch helplessly while my family's means of subsistence were decimated. I performed some research the next day. It was easy to identify the big-shot businessman, Robert Caldwell, who was attempting to take over Dad's firm. Our home was close to his workplace. When I asked to see Mr. Caldwell, the receptionist gave me a weird look. Her eyebrows went up as she questioned, "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's crucial." "Just 5 minutes, please," I pleaded. She must have felt sorry for me since she waved me to the elevator after making a phone call. It was top floor, she claimed. The ascent seemed to go on forever. As soon as the doors opened, I saw Robert Caldwell in person. He was older than I thought, with piercing eyes and silver hair. He responded, "Well, well," as he gave me a sidelong glance. "What do we have here?" I took a deep breath. "My name is Emily Thompson, Mr. Caldwell. I'm here to discuss Thompson Windows, my father's business." He raised his eyebrows. "The daughter of Thompson. This is not what was intended. Let's chat. Come on in." I tried not to stare at the scenery as I followed him into his office. He motioned for me to have a seat as he sat behind his enormous desk. "So, Miss Thompson, what can I do for you?" I inhaled deeply. "Don't take over my father's business, please. For him, it is everything. There must be an alternative." Leaning back, Caldwell examined me. "Interesting. Miss Thompson, I have an idea for you. If you agree to marry my son, I'll stop being around your father." I looked at him, certain that I had misheard. "Excuse me." "I heard you. Get married to my son and help him mature. If you do that, your father's business will be secure." In a haze, I walked out of Caldwell's office. Wed his son? Was he crazy? However, the more I considered it, the more I saw how limited my options were. This or see the disintegration of my father's life's work. I was back in that scary workplace the next day. Caldwell was grinning smugly as he waited. "So, Miss Thompson, have you made your decision?" I inhaled deeply. "Yes, I'll do it. I'll marry your son." Caldwell gave a clap of his hands. "Great. Shall we introduce the two of you?" He was Caldwell's son, and before I knew it, I was being led into another room. The man who got up to welcome me was not at all the stuffy businessman I had anticipated. He had a crooked smile, black hair, and a towering stature. He said, "Hey," and held out his hand. "My name is Jack. Emily must be your name." Trying not to be surprised, I shook his hand. "Yeah, that's me." The father of Jack cleared his throat. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted." Jack's easygoing attitude disappeared as soon as the door shut behind him. He looked uneasy as he ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I apologize for this. My father has some quite antiquated beliefs." I tried to look casual as I shrugged. "It's okay. Aren't we both adults? This is something we can manage." Jack sounded strained as he laughed. "Yes, of course. No huge deal, just a casual arranged marriage." I hate to say it, but Jack was sort of intriguing throughout the hour-long conversation that followed. Despite his seeming irresponsibility, he was intelligent and humorous. I understood his father's desire for him to mature. Jack and I began dating, if you can call it that, throughout the course of the following several weeks. We went to movies, restaurants, and other events as usual, but there was always a hint of uneasiness. No matter how much we feigned, we both knew this wasn't genuine. So 6 months after that fateful meeting in Caldwell's office, I found myself walking down the aisle. My dad looked so proud, so happy. He had no idea of the deal I'd made to save his company. As I said my vows, I looked into Jack's eyes. There was no love there, not really, but there was friendship, and maybe that could be enough. The reception was a blur of congratulations and champagne. Jack's mother, Elizabeth, cornered me at one point. Her smile was tight. "Welcome to the family, dear," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "I do hope you'll make Jack happy." I plastered on my best fake smile. "I'll certainly try, Mrs. Caldwell." As we left for our honeymoon, I caught a glimpse of my father-in-law. He was beaming, clearly pleased with himself. I felt a flash of anger. This was all just a game to him. The first few years of our marriage were interesting, to say the least. Jack and I settled into a routine of sorts. We lived in a nice house, courtesy of his father's wealth, but it felt more like we were roommates than husband and wife. I tried my best to be a good influence on Jack. Slowly but surely, I saw changes in him. He started spending less time with his party-loving friends and more time at the office with his father. I could see the pride in his father's eyes when Jack started showing real interest in the business. It made me feel like maybe this whole arrangement wasn't for nothing. Jack's mother, on the other hand, was a different story. She never outright said anything, but I could feel her disapproval radiating off her in waves. The way she'd purse her lips when I spoke, or the backhanded compliments she'd give. "Oh, Emily, that dress is interesting. So brave of you to wear something like that." I'd grip my teeth and smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell." Despite the challenges, I held on to hope. Maybe, just maybe, Jack and I could grow to love each other. Maybe when we had kids, things would change. But life had other plans. It was a crisp fall day when we got the news. Jack and I sat in the doctor's office, the silence heavy between us. "I'm sorry," the doctor said, his voice gentle, "but the tests show that you, Mr. Caldwell, are unable to father children." The words hit me like a physical blow. No children. The one thing I'd been counting on to bring us closer, to make this marriage real, was now impossible. That night, as I lay awake, I thought about my own parents. Dad's business had flourished since my marriage to Jack. He'd even managed to double his turnover. I was happy for him, truly, but I couldn't help feeling a bit lost. I wanted to work, to have a purpose beyond being Jack's wife. But when I brought it up to him, his response was swift and firm. "Work? Why would you need to work? We have more than enough money." "It's not about the money, Jack. I want to do something meaningful." He shook his head. "In our circle, wives don't work. They do charity. Why don't you start a foundation or something?" And so, the Emily Caldwell Foundation for Children with Cancer was born. It wasn't what I'd imagined for myself, but it gave me purpose. I threw myself into the work, organizing fundraisers, visiting hospitals, doing whatever I could to help. Jack didn't seem to care much about my new passion. In fact, he didn't seem to care much about anything I did these days. We were living parallel lives, inhabiting the same space, but rarely intersecting. Years passed, 10 to be exact. And then everything changed again. Jack's father died suddenly of a heart attack. Just like that, Jack was thrust into the role of CEO. I tried to be supportive, but I could see him struggling under the weight of his new responsibilities. 2 years after that, we got more bad news. Jack's mother had cancer. We should move her to a care facility, Jack said, his voice detached. They can take better care of her there. But his mother refused. I will die in my own home, she declared, her chin lifted defiantly. Drawing on my years of experience with the Cancer Foundation, I took charge of her care. I hired nurses, coordinated treatments, and spent hours by her bedside. To my surprise, Elizabeth's attitude towards me began to soften. One day, as I was adjusting her pillows, she caught my hand. "You're a good woman, Emily," she said softly. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell." 5 years passed since Jack took over his father's company. I wish I could say things improved, but the truth was far from it. Jack's behavior became increasingly erratic. He was drinking more, coming home at odd hours, and snapping at me for the smallest things. One day, I received a call from Jack's assistant. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm sorry to bother you, but Mr. Caldwell hasn't been to the office in days. Is everything all right?" When he finally stumbled home that night, reeking of alcohol, I confronted him. "Jack, what's happening?" "Your assistant called. You haven't been to work." He laughed bitterly. "Work? What's the point? The company's going under anyway. Dear old Dad left me a sinking ship, and I couldn't keep it afloat." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All those years of hard work gone, and Jack seemed almost relieved. Desperate to salvage something, I reached out to my father. Despite being semi-retired, he agreed to help. He offered Jack a position as his deputy, hoping to mentor him back to success. But Jack's heart wasn't in it. He showed up late, left early, and generally did the bare minimum. I watched helplessly as my father's sales figures began to drop. I knew I had to have a serious talk with Jack. One night, after he'd had a few drinks as usual, I approached him. "Jack, we need to talk about work. You're barely showing up. My father's company is suffering because of you." Jack's face contorted with anger. "Oh, so now it's my fault. I never wanted this, Jules, any of it." "What are you talking about?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "This life, this marriage. I'm just waiting for Mom to kick the bucket so I can sell her house and get out of here." I stared at him, horrified. "How can you say that? Your mother is dying, and all you care about is her money. Don't act all high and mighty," he spat. "We both know this marriage is a sham. You're just as eager to get out as I am." Disgusted, I turned to leave the room. As I opened the door, I came face to face with Jack's mother. The look on her face told me she'd heard everything. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then silently, she reached out and squeezed my hand. In that gesture, I felt her gratitude, her understanding, and her sorrow. The day I got the call about my parents' plane crash, my world shattered. Mom and Dad gone in an instant. Their small plane to Hawaii, meant to be a second honeymoon, became their final journey. I needed support, someone to lean on, but Jack was nowhere to be found. My own husband couldn't even be bothered to show up to the funeral. As I stood there watching my parents' caskets lowered into the ground, I felt more alone than ever. After the funeral, anger began to replace my sorrow. How dare he? How could he abandon me when I needed him most? With this newfound fury fueling me, I marched into Dad's company. Our company now, I supposed. The sight that greeted me when I entered Dad's old office made my blood boil. There was Jack, lounging in Dad's chair like he owned the place, barking orders like some conquering hero. "Jack," I said, my voice tight with barely contained rage. "We need to talk." He looked up, his face a mask of annoyance. "What is it now, Jules? Can't you see I'm busy?" "Busy?" I spat. "You couldn't even be busy enough to come to my parents' funeral?" Jack rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go with the moralizing again. You know what, Jules? Always nagging, always pushing. Well, I'm done with it, and I'm done with you." I stared at him, shocked. Then I saw something change in his eyes. A cold, calculating look replaced the anger. "You know, Jules," he said, his voice suddenly calm. "This company, it's worth about $17 million. And guess what? As deputy director, it's all mine now." My heart dropped. "What are you talking about?" He leaned back in the chair, Dad's chair, with a smug smile. "I'm the deputy director. I have all the passwords, access to all the accounts. I'm in charge now, and there's nothing you can do about it." "You can't do this," I said, my voice shaking. "You've already run your father's company into the ground. I won't let you do the same to my father's legacy." Jack laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "Oh, I'm not going to run it. I'm going to sell it piece by piece, and then I'm going to live like a king." Before I could stop him, he turned to the computer. I watched in horror as he transferred a large sum from the company account to his personal one. "There," he said, turning back to me. "That should keep me comfortable for a while." Then, as if this whole thing was just a minor inconvenience, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a stack of papers. He tossed them at me casually. "Oh, and here are divorce papers. I think it's time we ended this farce, don't you?" I caught the papers reflexively, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It was too much, too fast. My parents dead, my marriage over, my father's company being stolen right in front of me. I left the office in a daze, divorce papers clutched in my hand. But as I walked, something inside me shifted. I'd spent years bending to Jack's will, to his father's manipulations. No more. It was time to fight back. With renewed determination, I headed straight to my father's lawyer's office. Mr. Henderson had been Dad's friend and confidant for years. If anyone could help me, it would be him. "Emily," Mr. Henderson said, rising to greet me as I entered his office. "I'm so sorry about your parents. How are you holding up?" I collapsed into the chair across from him, the events of the day spilling out in a rush. Mr. Henderson listened patiently, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. "Emily, I think it's time I shared something with you. Your father's will. He made some changes just before the accident." As he read the will, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The company, it was mine, all mine. Dad had left it to me, not Jack. But there was more. Mr. Henderson looked up from the papers, his eyes twinkling. "There's something else you should know. Your father dismissed Jack 2 weeks before his death, fired him outright." I couldn't help it. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh for the first time in what felt like forever. So all those orders Jack was giving, completely meaningless. Mr. Henderson confirmed. Then he pulled out an envelope. "There's one more thing, a letter from your father." With shaking hands, I opened it. Dad's familiar handwriting blurred as tears filled my eyes. "My dearest Emily," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry for leaving you like this, but I hope I've left you with the tools to build the life you deserve. The company is yours now, and Jules, it's time to let go of Jack. You've given enough of yourself to that marriage. It's time to live for you. I love you, sweetheart. Make me proud." I looked up at Mr. Henderson, wiping my eyes. "Do you have a pen?" Without a word, he handed me one. I signed the divorce papers Jack had given me, feeling lighter with each stroke of the pen. "Can you file these?" I asked, handing them back. "I want this done as quickly as possible." Mr. Henderson nodded. "Consider it done." As I left his office, I felt free for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever. I was in control of my own life. No more Jack, no more Caldwells pulling my strings. I pulled out my phone and called Sarah, my best friend from the charity foundation. "Sarah, it's Emily. Want to meet for coffee? I've got some news." An hour later, we were seated in our favorite cafe, lats in hand. "So," Sarah said, eyeing me curiously, "what's this big news?" I took a deep breath, then let it all out. Jack, the company, the divorce. Sarah listened, her eyes widening. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Girl, you're free, and now you're the boss." I couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "I don't know, Sarah. Can I really run a company?" She fixed me with a stern look. "Are you kidding me, Emily? You've been running that charity foundation like a pro for years. You're smart, you're organized, and you actually care about people. You're going to be an amazing CEO." After my talk with Sarah, I felt invigorated. It was time to face the music and get my things from Jack's house. I never really thought of it as my home, and now I knew why. I found my mother-in-law, Elizabeth, in the living room, her face drawn, tired from her ongoing battle with cancer. "Elizabeth," I said gently, "I'm here to get my things. Jack and we're getting divorced." To my surprise, her eyes filled with tears. "Emily, I know I haven't always been kind to you, but you've been so good to me. Would you consider taking me with you?" I was stunned. "You want to come with me?" Before she could answer, the front door slammed open. Jack stormed in, his face red with fury. "You," he shouted, pointing at me. "What the hell did you do?" "The company accounts are blocked. I can't access the money." I straightened my spine, looking him down in the eye. "That money isn't yours, Jack. It never was. Oh, and by the way, my father fired you 2 weeks ago. You have no claim to the company. I've already instructed security not to let you in the building." Jack's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Then his gaze shifted, noticing his mother packing a suitcase. "Mom, what are you doing?" Elizabeth looked at her son, her expression a mix of sadness and determination. "I'm going with Emily. I'm sorry, Jack, but you've proven to be unreliable." Jack's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Unreliable? Me? This is all your fault. You raised me to be this way. You and your coddling and your expectations." He turned to me, his voice dripping with venom. "Fine. Get out, both of you. I don't need either of you." I felt a wave of pity for him. This angry, bitter man was a far cry from the charming, responsible guy I'd married. But I couldn't let that sway me, not anymore. "Come on, Elizabeth," I said softly. "Let's get your things." As we packed, Jack continued to rant and rave, hurling insults and blame, but we tuned him out, focusing on the task at hand. The drive to my parents' house was quiet. Elizabeth dozed in the passenger seat, the stress of the day taking its toll. As we pulled up to the house, a lump formed in my throat. It felt strange coming here without Mom and Dad. "We're here," I said softly, gently waking Elizabeth. I helped her inside, leading her to my parents' room. It felt right somehow to give her the space. "Are you sure?" Elizabeth asked, her eyes wide as she took in the room. I nodded, swallowing past the lump in my throat. Yes, I think they would have wanted it this way. As I helped Elizabeth settle in, I felt a strange mix of emotions: grief for my parents, relief at being free from Jack, and uncertainty about the future. But underneath it all, there was a glimmer of hope. Taking over Dad's company was like diving into the deep end of a pool without knowing how to swim. Those first few months were a world of meetings, financial reports, and sleepless nights. But I was determined to make it work. I hired Tom, a brilliant business consultant, as my right-hand man. He patiently guided me through the intricacies of running a multi-million-dollar company. "You've got good instincts, Emily," he'd say. "Trust them." Slowly but surely, I found my footing. 6 months in, I wasn't just treading water. I was swimming laps. The company's performance began to improve, and I felt a surge of pride knowing Dad would have been pleased. Through it all, I never neglected the Cancer Foundation. If anything, my work there became even more important to me. It was a link to my past and a beacon for my future. Elizabeth's condition worsened over time. I threw myself into her care, determined to make her final days as comfortable as possible. We grew close during those 2 years, healing old wounds and forming a bond one never thought possible. The day she passed, I held her hand and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Elizabeth." She squeezed my hand weakly, a small smile on her face, before slipping away peacefully. I personally planned the funeral, making sure everything went according to plan. Jack failed to appear. Even though I wasn't shocked, I was nevertheless astounded by how far he had gone. Mr. Henderson called me a few weeks following the funeral. "You have to see something, Emily. Would you be able to visit my office?" I was surprised to see Jack there with a young blonde dangling from his arm. He gave me a sly smile. "Well, if the little CEO isn't involved, I'm only come to pick up my inheritance, so don't worry. I may have had disagreements with Mom, but I mean, blood is thicker than water, right?" As I waited for Mr. Henderson to speak, I bit my tongue. After clearing his throat, the attorney started to read Elizabeth's will. As he talked, I saw Jack's arrogant look change to one of shock and then rage. "Therefore, I leave Emily Thompson my home and all of my savings, with a condition that the funds be given to the cancer charity that she so fervently believes in." My eyes welled up with tears. Elizabeth's last deed of generosity left me speechless. Jack lost it. Her manipulation of Mom is what this is. She is a gold digger and a fake. She is taking my inheritance after ruining my life. His lover moved away from him, appearing puzzled. "You claimed that this money would cover us for the rest of our lives. I'm leaving this place." Jack stammered as she bounded out. Jack's ongoing tirade faded behind me as I walked out of the office. I felt liberated and light. Elizabeth's gift was more than simply cash. It was approval. She had actually seen me and thought I was deserving.